Today is Friday, March 6th. It's the afternoon. I'm Cindy Allen, CEO of TradeForce Multiplier, a global trade consultancy services that handles high-level strategy matters as well as everyday run-of-the-mill international trade classifications, risk reviews for importers, exporters, technology companies, anyone involved in international trade. Welcome to Simply Trade Cindy's version, where I base an international trade update on a Taylor Swift song. This is brought to you in association with Global Training Center. Today's song is Ready for It. And if you have any exposure to the trade news, you've heard all about the IEEPA tariffs and the saga that's going on with that. But first, let's touch on what else has happened this week in trade. Yesterday, DHS Secretary Noem was removed from her position. Scuttlebutt is that we may be seeing some additional movements at DHS headquarters as well as CBP headquarters. We'll stay tuned to see if that happens. Usually if a secretary moves, her core team tends to move on, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. So we'll keep a close eye on that. But it's interesting to see. The new nominee is a senator from Oklahoma. Has not been formally nominated yet, but had a broad base of support within Congress and also has the president's support. So we'll keep track of that as well. 24 states sued in the Court of International Trade to halt the collection of Section 122 tariffs that were imposed immediately after the IEEPA duties were discontinued. They were saying that it does not meet the imbalance of payments, which is what is required to assess Section 320 or 122 tariffs on importations into the United States. So we will follow that. It was very widely speculated that there would be legal challenges to 122 for that very reason. Congress is still signaling support for the USMCA approval to go forward, but they have said that the president has the final say. We'll keep track of that. The USMCA, we've heard some discussions about whether that will stay a trilateral agreement or it will go to a bilateral agreement, one with Canada, one with Mexico. There's also a faction of Congress that is supporting, let's extend it one more year and give us the proper time to do a renegotiation of things that are working, things that aren't working, as well as understand how the IEEPA tariffs were going to settle out and the Section 122, all of the 232s and the 301s. It would be easier if all the negotiations took place once everything is settled from this year. I don't have a great feeling that that's going to happen, but hopefully it will happen. That would be the easiest thing for everyone. Secretary Bessent said in a speech that he believes that 15% 122 sections are coming for some specific industries, which also may raise a separate legal challenge as the language in Section 122 does call it for to be uniformly applied. So there's no carve-outs, there's no variances. It is one percentage rate. So if it's going to go up from 10 to 15%, many believe that it has to be a wholesale movement. So we haven't seen it. It's Friday afternoon. It hasn't gone to 15% yet. So perhaps that's been a premature type of announcement. On the transportation side, with the war in Iran, that has halted all the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. It has created a lot of backup, a lot of concern with those trading in oil and as well as the consumers and processors of oil. This will also affect transportation more widely as those ships that are involved in that traffic get in a traffic jam in that strait, but also affect those vessel-going ships that use that oil that is contained on those ships. So it is a developing story as the war continues in the Middle East. Our thoughts are with everyone involved in that. Something that I think is important not to overlook in everything that's going on in international trade is the opportunity for trade to be involved with the government when it comes to setting policy and advising them. This week, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office asked for nomination for 4 separate trade advisory groups. These were published in separate notifications in the Federal Register notice. These are separate from COAC. COAC is a DHS committee as well as Treasury committee. These are U.S. trade representative committees. So anyone who might be interested in applying for those should look up the Federal Register notice that was published earlier this week and apply. It gives an opportunity for you to develop relationships not only with government but fellow industry individuals who have many times the same mindset and also have great opportunity to perhaps affect policy going forward and at least provide your thoughts and your company's thoughts on trade issues. So what's the big news and why ready for it? Are you ready for it? Are you ready for the IEEPA process? So on March 2nd, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit sent the decision for IEEPA back to the Court of International Trade. If you recall, the government had asked for 90 days so that Congress could act and that they could assess what their position was for this to move forward on the refunds, and the Federal Circuit said no. Not only are we not granting you 90 days, we're sending it immediately, and we're going to send it back to the Court of International Trade that has jurisdiction. So that set in motion a couple of things. On the 4th, the Court of International Trade had what everyone kind of thought was going to be a deliberative discussion and in a normal hearing that did turn into quite the show for both the government, Department of Justice, and the judge. It was almost like they were bickering back and forth like people that were dating. And the end result was that the Court of International Trade judge indicated a couple of things. One, it was his ruling that there was no need to file suit for non-final entries. So that is anything not liquidated or anything liquidated but not yet final, that 90 or 100-day time frame. It also ordered CBP to liquidate without regard to IEEPA duties. So basically, if you paid the IEEPA duties, you will get a refund for any of those issues. There was some discussion about how CBP's position might be different, and the court made it clear in that hearing that he didn't believe that CBP had a position, that the court, the Supreme Court of the United States, had ruled these duties to be illegal and therefore collected illegally, and there was no interpretation of that should indicate that all of the duties that were paid should be issued a refund. They scheduled a hearing for today and asked that CBP be present to explain the refund process or a possible refund process and how that affected liquidation and how all of that tied together. You've heard me talk about before how liquidation really relies on the underlying entry summary. And if that entry summary needs a change, that entry summary is then what triggers that liquidation status to change, or the amount that is to be liquidated to change, and then that triggers a refund. That would have required every possible of the 71 million entries that the Department of Justice referenced in the hearing on the 4th. Every one of those 75 or 71 million entries would have had to be touched by CBP or the trade to actually affect that refund, to liquidate without regard to IEEPA duties. Today, in a filing by CBP, in that court hearing today, it was a conference, it was closed to the public. However, CBP did file with the court in this action a proposal to refund the entries. And that is that their proposal is that CBP would allow importers to file a declaration in ACE with a list of entries on an Excel. The ACE would then run validations on that and auto-recalculate the IEEPA refund. It would then, CBP would then verify that the declaration is accurate. ACE would automatically liquidate. CBP would certify that liquidation, and then the Treasury would issue refunds, as they do in all of the processes. So this would require, in that filing, Brandon Lord, who is the executive director, did indicate this would require CBP programming, which could take about 45 days. CBP in that same filing also questioned if they had the authority to stop liquidation during that time frame. And he did say there were entries, hundreds of thousands of entries that were set to liquidate today. Every Friday is a liquidation day. It starts at 2 a.m. It's automatic. It does run through mid-morning and automatically liquidates those. And CBP was questioning if they had the authority to stop that process because by law it liquidates at 314 days unless there is an action taken. So that is an open question for everyone in this process. Lots of other questions come to mind. Will the underlying entry be updated? ACE is the system of record both for CBP and the trade, not the piece of paper. It is the ACE system that is the system of record. So in this filing and in this recalculation, will it also update the underlying entry summary? Because if it doesn't, that's going to create all kinds of issues for any other protest, reliquidation issue, a post-summary corrections, anything that might be subject to reconciliation or drawback. Anything post-entry is going to be affected if the underlying entry is not corrected. So that remains an open question, and I know there are a couple of different trade associations that are proposing and reminding CBP and the court, this is the system of record, that underlying entry needs to be updated. Would a broker be required to file the declaration that CBP is actually proposing? One would think that this would have to go through ABI if it is actually tied to those ABI records requiring a broker or someone, a self-filer that has access to an ABI channel. And if so, will those ABI systems need programming? So 45 days plus whatever however long the ABI systems need to be programmed, because I don't think that ACE is going to allow just importers to come in and file declarations without having a current pipeline to get it there. So there's only a few pipelines into ACE, ABI, AMS, ACAS. Now, they could open a new aperture to file that. We don't know, but it remains an open question. If programming is needed, how long will that take? Will it require the broker system? How will the broker system then be updated with that entry information? Will they be able to query that information? Will they have to query it? Will they be a pushback to the broker so that the broker system is updated with the current status of that information? And how will the broker know to do that if we have to query that? So that's an open question. We want all the systems to be in sync. And if only CBP's system is in sync, that also creates issues down the road. What happens to reconciliation entries that have already paid this duty? Will they be able to file the reconciliation in this process? Will those entries have to be accepted from this bulk declaration process? How will that really work? And then if they are accepted, will the reconciliation be programmed to allow for the refund of duties upon filing of that reconciliation, which is usually for other issues other than duty? It's classification value. And then will there be opportunities to correct other issues? So if I have an issue, let's say it was misclassified, I want to file a post-summary correction on that. Will I be able to do that if this bulk refund process goes through? So if not, it's going to be really hard for importers to go through and determine, audits. Hey, is my classification right? Is everything in this entry correct? Because if not, I'm losing my opportunity to file a post-summary correction because this is going to be liquidated. And if it's liquidated, my only court recourse is a protest, which usually is a little bit more involved than a post-summary correction. So these are all open questions. I expect lots of dialogue with CBP if this is accepted by the court, which really does have jurisdiction to say yay, nay, let's move forward with this. But it was really entertaining to listen to that hearing on the 4th. You can find it on the Court of International Trade has a page. You can find the court hearing. It was very interesting as a non-lawyer trade participant to listen to that. And it really did make me think about, the bickering back and forth between dating and really the song, Taylor Swift's song, Ready For It, talks about, are you ready for the dating process? And one of the last phrases of her song is, are you ready for it? Let the games begin. baby, let the games begin. We're in the IEEPA refund thick of it. And are you ready for it? We'll talk to you next week.